Welcome to another exciting edition of Blogging Heads. I am Ezra Klein of the Washington Post, and I'm here with the electronically connected Dave Weigel of the Washington Independent. Dave, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. I'm inside a rental car in, what town is this? This is Littleton, Massachusetts. And it's going to be either the most visually exciting or incomprehensible Blogging Heads of all time.
Or possibly both.
It looks kind of like one of the H.R. Geiger designs from the first Alien. I think actually... Well, that's not the point. But yeah, I'm on the trail covering the Scott Brown campaign for Senate in Massachusetts.
I think it was a week ago, actually, that you were the first person that I knew who began saying to people, look, Martha Coakley is a car crash of a candidate, and she's going to blow this election. And at the time, I thought, my friend Dave Weigel, he's a pessimist. He gets very worked up about things. But you were a prophet, sir. You were a prophet.
What made me prophetic, beyond my quasi-Titterrock DNA, is that I know that she was coming to D.C. for a fundraiser last Tuesday, and I wondered why she would do that. Obviously, she didn't have a lot of money. Also, obviously, her campaign staff wasn't really plugged into the optics of running a hard campaign right now because. Right. She'd been knocked in local media already for just not working very hard. I mean, if we dial it back, Coakley is the state attorney general. She's really popular, or she was until this election. She won the open job in 2006, like 70% of the vote plus. So she wins this December primary for the Democratic nomination by 19 points, and then just starts to coast. She doesn't hold a lot of events. She doesn't run any TV ads. Her Republican opponent goes on the air first, all while barnstorming in the state. And then right before the election, when she's already getting attacked for not campaigning too much, she came to D.C. and I was like, well, this isn't going to be good. And then that event ended up being a disaster, and she hasn't really recovered from these disasters since then.
And it's just, I mean, it really has been this sort of amazing gaffe-a-minute campaign. I mean, I can't handle, I'm not an elections guy. You know me, we talk about this stuff. I don't make predictions. I don't, feel capable of affecting it or even really understanding it. But I really can't handle the sort of level of tragedy. There's some prospect that it isn't just that they'll lose that seat for Ted Kennedy. That's not Ted Kennedy's seat. It is, as people say, Massachusetts' seat. But the idea that Ted Kennedy's death will be the difference between healthcare passing and not passing, because Martha Coakley couldn't get herself worked up enough to run a serious campaign, is such an unbelievable tragedy and shame.
Yeah, one of the first Republican consultants I know who talked about this race was Patrick Ruffini, who's this really plugged-in Republican operative at the next right, and he wrote a post kind of gloating preemptively about the prospect of taking the Kennedy seat. I forget he pointed out they have a picture of Ted in the Senate cloakroom that the Democrats are dedicating dedicating the health care bill to him. President Obama didn't. Then, ironically, Scott Brown's first ad, the Republican candidate's first ad, had JFK morphing into Scott Brown. And it's kind of brilliant. Obviously, every campaign that's winning is brilliant, right. But it's kind of brilliant how he's been able to convince the state that he, not this incompetent Democrat, can carry on the proud Kennedy legacy of being a rich guy who looks working class. But while they vote for him, they should disregard any idea that Ted Kennedy's legacy matters. I mean, during the final debate, which was the only one that was televised, he said, David Gergen, actually, not Coakley, threw him this softball and said, well, this would be Kennedy's seat if you take it. And he said, it's not Ted Kennedy's seat, it's not the Democrat seat, it's the people's seat. Well, that's true, but he's also trying to convince voters that it wouldn't be too bad if they love Kennedy. It's not going to be a disaster if they support him, and it's something Coakley just couldn't take advantage of. It is very emotional. It's something that I think $2 million, more than that, millions of dollars have flown in from grassroots activists once they realized they could lose it. But this guy ran an ad comparing himself to JFK, and she didn't take a swing at him. It's stunning how only too late Democrats realize the drama here. Yeah,
I mean, it really is something. And, you do get a sense that campaigns, the compressed timetable, I think, has really been to her detriment. I think that aside from the fact that when people began realizing she was in trouble, she began calling Curt Schilling a Yankees fan, which probably shouldn't have been her initial response. there is a sense in which she just doesn't, I don't know who will win tomorrow, and I don't really have an opinion on it, but it shouldn't be this close, and part of the reason it is she doesn't have time to right the ship, right? There isn't time, or there wasn't time, for Brown's narrative to burn out. And what I thought was interesting about Obama coming into the state was that I actually didn't really think, when I looked at how they were spinning it, that they were bringing Obama to the state primarily in order to amp up the state base or whatever else it was. The way they spun it, if you read sort of Mike Allen's Twitters, and I think, sort of what Mike Allen was saying, they're saying is what they're spinning.
I read those Twitters, yeah.
He said this wasn't an emotional decision. Rahm and Axelrod were calling around. They were seeing if the race was lost or if it was teetering. I mean, the Obama campaign was playing, or the Obama administration was playing an interesting game where they were trying to convince the media that the race was winnable by doing something that they wouldn't otherwise do unless it was winnable. And the fact that they had to do it struck me as pretty good evidence that it might well not be won. But, I mean, it was interesting, right? What they were trying to do, it seemed to me, was disrupt the media narrative that this race was over and Democrats could stay home on Tuesday. That, if Obama was gonna put his own prestige on the line here, they had to seriously believe they could take this one home.
It's a little bit weakened by the fact that they did the same for John Corzine. Remember, they kind of gave up on Craig Deeds early, but they let it be known that Corzine's polls showed him with a chance to win, and then Corzine ended up losing by, I think, 4.5 points. That was also undercut by the White House leaking that advisors thought Coakley was doomed. If we can get really meta,
by the way, I don't think that they can win it for her. I just think that they were playing an interesting game with trying to do something dramatic to change the way people were looking at the race.
They were. I mean, and the fact that we're talking about this and framing this this way at all and talking about Coakley being a bad candidate is a White House victory, because a week ago, if they had lost it, it would have just been electorate revolts against health care. And I think when I bet at these predictions, I remember being in New York 23 and thinking Doug Hoffman win. He didn't. But if they lose it tomorrow, that will be most of the spin. But if they could just make 20% of the narrative, what are you going to do? Coakley's a bad candidate, and we've got to work with this guy now. Then that's something of a victory.
It is an insane bit of spin, that one. I just want to take a second on this because this is something
it's wrong. A lot of thought
to. Because I think one way to put it is simply this, right? Nobody disagrees that Ted Kennedy would vote for this bill, including Vicki Kennedy, and nobody disagrees that if Ted Kennedy were somehow running in a special election, he would be destroying Scott Brown. Whatever you want to say about this, the people of Massachusetts have repeatedly and would again elect the guy who is more associated than any other politician in America with this plan, with this exact type of plan. And Scott Brown, to even take it one step further, will defend and continues to defend the Massachusetts plan, which is the specific. I think that's really important here. It's not a cousin of it. It is the specific architecture on which the national plan is based. I mean, there is nothing crazier than the idea that this election is some sort of ideological repudiation of healthcare. And the other thing, just one more thing to say is, it is evidence of the way that D.C. has internalized the filibuster. That people talk about Scott Brown winning as if like, okay, well now, not only maybe Democrats can't because of a procedural hurdle, but probably they shouldn't because the electorate has spoken. 59 Democrats will vote for this bill.
I mean, if viewers don't want to look it up, that's the largest margin either party's had since the 70s.
Right. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it is crazy to watch it.
I mean, I actually just talked to Brown for 5 seconds at this rally. I mean, it's the last day of the election cycle, so he's not actually really doing much talking. He broke aside at this prayer breakfast, which I couldn't be at in the morning, and talked to reporters to kind of get knives in at Martha Coakley. But I tried to press him on if he was the 41st Republican vote, if there are any Obama nominees who would join filibusters on, because there's people Obama renominated recently, they're getting filibuster. He just said, no, and he just kind of walked away without answering the question. But I asked that, there's a lot of really gaffes and scandals have defined this campaign, but if he's put in there, there's going to be a hard narrative that clearly Democrats no longer have an electoral mandate. 70 million people voted for Obama, but, 800,000 voted for this guy, and that cancels that out. And not only does that cancel, it'd be one thing, it doesn't flip control of the Senate. They're going to argue that this, Senate Democrats don't have any right to do anything. They really, Brown has been arguing for weeks that like it's an affront to democracy that they might try and vote for health care before they let him into this. So it's something, but I would disagree that it's totally wrong spin, because voters here, I mean, I talk to people at the rallies 90% of the time, and then try to talk to candidates and advisors 10% of the time, and there are a lot of unaffiliated people and people who say they voted for Ted Kennedy who are, they just haven't got the say on the healthcare bill. Mm-hmm. I haven't met any kind of Fire Dog Lake, we don't like the healthcare bill because there's no single payer who are voting for Scott Brown, but I've heard of those people. I've heard of people putting Facebook messages up to that account, but I've heard people who just say, I have friends in Canada, and their mom had to, live without oxygen there, so we can't have that. It's going to cost a lot more. There are people who might have sat out an election if we'd passed health care in June last year, and Kennedy had died, and they were just replacing Kennedy. Like, it is true.
Oh yeah.
That this issue, through months and months of wrangling, has become toxic for a lot of people. All across the board, but the irony is that's because the filibuster is so hardened that anything Democrats do, if they try, I'm sure if Brown wins, he won't be certified yet. But he will. I'm sure he'll fly down to D.C. immediately. He might
I've talked to people.
Watch him fly down.
I've talked to folks in the White House and Capitol Hill about this. My sense is that they're not going to try to do any monkeying with his certification. They're not going to try to pass it that way. We're going to see happen, and I agree with you, by the way, that this thing is, I don't know if it's toxic. There was a Gallup poll the other day that had 49% of Americans saying, their representative should vote for it, and 47% saying he shouldn't. But there have been plenty of polls showing that it's unpopular. But this is sort of why we have this sort of representative democracy. We have a system in which everything becomes unpopular by the time you do it. I mean, it's very predictable. There's a book by a couple political scientists called Stealth Democracy, which is precisely on this point. People hate watching our legislative process. They just hate it. And by the end of it, they just hate whatever is in it. And it's why we have these folks out there who are supposed to, say, media's not doing a great job on this. There's a lot of bullshit out there, but frankly, this is a good bill, and I'm going to vote for it and go back to my district and defend it. I mean, that's sort of the point of them. But what you would have
if you want to get into, James Buchanan public choice theory, the last thing you want to do in this negotiation is make it add one senator that Democrats have to pull over to get this deal through. Because what they've ended up doing, instead of making the bill better in any way that anyone wants it, that even a Nebraska voter would rather something be done with the bill except for the compromise Nelson got.
Sure.
They've had to lard it up with compromises to specific people, and the harder this 60 seat majority is for everything, the more you just need to play games and give people favors, and that is what's going to keep happening. Brown has actually, I didn't think the 41st vote thing was going to work, because according to polls, people actually do like the health care bill. Not enough. There's more intensity from people who don't like it. Mm-hmm. But
Rasmussen had a slight majority in favor of it.
Well,
but then Suffolk didn't. The electorate seems to be moving on that very quickly en masse.
He focuses on strong supporters versus supporters who have been very strong. So he has his Obama approval index that says lots of people like Obama, but look at these people who don't like him, really, really don't like him, and they're the ones you should pay attention to. No, the point is that I didn't think the 41st vote thing would work, because people basically kind of want the bill. But the way Brown has framed it is that because there aren't enough Republicans to filibuster things, everything's happening in backroom deals.
Right.
He uses the phrase backroom deal.
That's a very smart frame.
It is a smart frame. And again, every campaign that's winning is brilliant, but this one especially, to go into a campaign in Massachusetts as a Republican who's not actually that moderate is something. And I talk to these voters who, some of them are kind of soft. I always ask, if you're a Republican, if you just started supporting him recently, and I've talked to people who are unaffiliated, they like Ted Kennedy, but they're really angry that the healthcare bill is being debated in these back rooms and they had to give a deal to somebody to pass it. And I talk to them and say, you realize that if this happens, they'll probably try to cram through something anyway, even worse. And it's, at this point, we're just, boxing shadows, because nothing's going to change about this recently. I did see Joe Biden say something in Florida about how the supermajority is
Supermajority, yeah, but they're not going to touch it. You can't touch that when you're losing your supermajority. You know, you can do it when the other party is in power, when you got a supermajority, but it sort of can't be your response to losing an election. You know, I'll just say one thing on the backroom deals, because I found this to be a really fascinating thing to watch. I think it's very smart framing from the Brown campaign. But of course, you think of the Gang of Six, right, which was your real sort of Republican bipartisan process there, which was, of course, a backroom deal. I mean, everything has always been backroom deals. There's been sort of a funny thing in the media where I always feel that the job of the Washington media, in theory, is to study Washington and then sort of come to you and say, here's how it really is. But in fact, what they do is they figure out what the country thinks and then put themselves in the country's shoes and then try to interpret it as the country already would. Which you're seeing with these backroom deals. You know, there's this real sort of, I'm shocked to find that politics is happening in this Congress attitude on the part of a lot of these people, as if the Nelson's deal is somehow strange, as if, you know, we didn't, you know, I mean, you probably remember, but a lot of people don't know what was done to pass Medicare Part D, where there were multiple ethics complaints, where somebody tried to where DeLay tried to bribe people. But even just going back and back and back, I mean, Medicare Part D is Medicare itself is entirely a deal between Wilbur Mills and Johnson. I mean, you just go to anything, and there's just always been people horse trading to get things. And the Nebraska horse trade wasn't even a very big horse trade. I mean, one thing you're seeing is that I think that, I do wonder how much our system can function under this sort of national and polarized media that delivers ideological types of transparency. Because the way they've always made things work out is these sort of deals. He's using pork to grease the way for things. And it's going to be really, really difficult on them if the new thing is that you can't negotiate for anything.
Well, I would say that Brown is on some solid footing here because if he doesn't, someone else in the crowd will hearken to Obama's campaign promise that the healthcare debate was going to happen in front of C-SPAN cameras. And there are smart Republicans who point this out and point out the videos of Obama doing this. Obama said that. I'm not sure why he said that. He can't admit it because... Like that. Well, because
I wish he didn't say.
I don't know what you mean by partisan transparency, but I have noticed, since early 2009, I talked to people like Grover Norquist who are pretty naked about the idea that if there's total transparency and everyone reads what's in every bill, there's going to be something they can get angry about, and there'll be another thing they can get angry about, and they can kind of unspool this by pointing out that every bill is actually a casserole of handouts to awful people. Right. It's hard to understand because it's not like we have representative democracy in order for senators not to represent the interests of their states. Right. And there's not a lot of nudging Republicans on this, but because they've gotten really bought into that idea in the last year, really. That it's kind of Ron Paul Jim Dominism, that the job of the congressman is to repeal legislation and to repeal regulation and to do absolutely nothing. Everything that comes back to their state is a result of corruption. And it hasn't gotten to that level in this race. We got to the first part of the argument, which is that everything should be transparent. Obama lied. Things that happen in back room deals are of necessity bad things. Again, Coakley, I do think you have to blame the Democrats in Congress and the president for making this fightable. I think she could have made all these mistakes and won narrowly. If she loses, she would have, I'd give her a couple points. If this was still a situation, and if the election was in June 2009 or something.
I think that's exactly right. I think two things on this. One thing I've been thinking a lot about is the regularity with which this happens. So, we remember Reagan and Clinton as really fantastic communicators, people who really had a sense of the country's politics. But of course, Reagan lost 27 seats in his first midterm election, and Clinton lost 54. And Bush would have lost a bunch except for 9/11. He was trending downward in the polls as well.
And redistricting, actually.
Redistricting was a big deal there, as well. So I went and looked at it, and a lot of people know these stats, but exactly 2 presidents since the Civil War have ever gained seats in the election directly after their inauguration. And so at some point you have to say that there is something systemic happening here, where we bring these guys in and we think they're going to do a good job and we're excited about their agenda and we voted for their platform. But when we watch that hit the realities of our system, we begin to hate them, hate their agenda, try to bring some other people in, and then we bring those other people in, and as often as not, certainly in the cases of Clinton and Reagan, then we reelect the guys we didn't like a couple months ago, because it turns out those other people are no better. And so I think there's something really problematic going on there. But I'll just make one other point on this, which is that I think that if you watch a guy like Nelson and you try to figure out where he was coming from on his deal with Nebraska, I think here's a guy who is a moderate Democrat from a conservative state who wanted to vote for what is at least perceived to be a liberal bill. And so he said to himself, how do I do that? And came to two answers. Is one, that I show I'm ambivalent on it, I'm not going to be rubber stamp, I need it to be changed, need to be more moderate. And number two is that I get things from my state so that they feel, at the very least, it's good to have me in the Senate. And the problem is that the way you get that leverage to make those deals is you talk the bill down for months and months and months, and voters hear you and the media puts you on TV, and so everybody begins to think this is not a very good bill because if it can't even get moderates in the president's own party, then at the last minute you flip and you get some concessions and you declare victory. But it turns out that when you flip, Democrats the voters don't flip with you. They just think you're a crass politician too. They still don't like the bill, and now they don't like you. I think that what happened in Nelson this year has disproved a really, really, really rich tradition of how these people get to vote for these bills. And I'll be interested to see what the legislative aftermath is. I mean, the lessons of Nelson are going to be fascinating to watch.
Well, this is something I like a lot about the Tea Party movement. I cover the Tea Party movement closely. There are a lot of people who cover it closely. I think some of them cover it because the signs are funny. Some of them cover it because they adore them. I'm in between. I think they're, I wish they were around when Bush was screwing all this stuff up, but I'm glad they're there because I think that's happening because of them, and that people are more aware because they're emailing each other and learning on the internet and all sorts of insert social media that's important here that I just feel weird even mentioning on a vlog. Are connecting them, and they can find out immediately what's in this. And this is all happening as Democrats are responsible for everything that's going wrong. On the liberal blogosphere, I do see some useful investigation of how Congress works that's enlightening and should be making their activists angrier and ready to push harder. Usually, I'm thinking of things that you were just arguing, things that Matt Iglesias will argue about the filibuster and how it didn't used to be like this. Basically, Ben Nelson's kind of taken it from both sides. Joe Lieberman's taken it from both sides. These movements that have gotten very informed about the way Washington works. It's just that it is covered from a more partisan direction, and I don't know. I hope that's the lesson that's taken from this about Ben Nelson, because there have been people pointing out for months that what Blue Dogs want is not actually fiscally responsible. It sounds fiscally responsible, and they say it's fiscally responsible when they propose it, but it's usually just something that's good for their state. Right. And there's, again, there's a little chasm that doesn't get jumped when people talk about that. There are things we didn't used to talk about that do get jumped now, about, what is in page 597 of the bill. So maybe we'll get to a point where people investigate this. But for now, we're still in this zone. And I've been watching it in Massachusetts. Brown talks almost not at all about the way Washington actually works or about issues. And in that, one of the people I just talked to at this rally said she was phone banking for him, and one of the occasional Democrats, soft Democrats, who's going to vote for him, said she likes Brown because he's the white Obama. And so this woman I was talking to was, we were kind of teasing this out, and we agreed that a thing voters like about this guy is not they now agree with all 10 points of Heritage Foundation's manifesto. They just think Washington doesn't work in the right way, and they heard about this corrupt bargain that happened, and this guy looks like he's going to come and change it. And
this is my biggest frustration with this. I think that's exactly right. And you see it in every election, right? People hate Washington, but the lever they feel comfortable pulling are the people inside of it. So they don't like the outcome during the Obama administration or the Clinton administration, so eventually they'll change the president, right? Maybe we get a third-party unifier, or just a president from a different party. They don't like Congress, so they replace the people in Congress. And individuals in Washington, a sense you really get here is how weak they are, how constrained Obama is, how little power the vast majority of senators or congressmen actually have, how much party incentives do to take fundamentally decent people and make them indecent. And it's very, very hard to get people to focus on the system. But at some point, with the same thing happening, with every president, every Congress, we bring a new guy in, like him a lot, vote his party out the 2 years later. At some point, we got to say it's not about the guy who sits in the chair. If every person we put in the chair has the exact same experience, and I mean everything has enough different conditions that we can construct a coherent narrative about it. Oh, if only Obama had done a more moderate health care plan and then had pivoted to jobs earlier or something. That was Charlie Cook's take, if I remember correctly. But it's all of them.
I think you were having an argument with somebody on Twitter today who said if only they'd found something in the health care bill that Republicans could agree on, they would have passed it faster.
Right. I mean, the whole thing has been just sort of baffling.
No such thing exists.
I mean, you watch guys like Conrad and Greg, or you watch guys like Grassley and Baucus, and these are people who genuinely like each other, Snow, genuinely have good working relationships, genuinely trust each other, and frankly, could both agree on this bill. But what you watched happen as the process wore on was that individuals couldn't break the sort of the more structural forces, the party's incentives and the Tea Parties and everything else going on. They couldn't be individuals. They were just parts of their party. And I mean, all the political science literature backs this up. There's much, much less individual initiative than there once was. You watched it happen in the Gang of Six. I mean, the bill we're looking at in the Senate is pretty much the Gang of Six bill that they were making in that room, and that people were, fairly in agreement on. They just couldn't get votes. At the end of the day, Grassley, facing a 2010 challenger, and Enzi, who's very, very deeply, built into his party's infrastructure, couldn't break the line. And I just don't think there's no way to do it. There's no person you can put there, not a Democrat and not a Republican, who can do that. It just is what it is. And you see it on the Democratic side, too, by the way. The fact that Reid got 60 Democrats together for this bill is unprecedented. It is astonishing. But it's simply because, at the end of the day, it is just virtually impossible for people to buck their party anymore. And it doesn't matter who you elect, who you put in that chair. Brown can talk how he wants. At the end of the day, he's going to have to defend against Republican primaries, too, and he'll need to raise money, and he'll have his own presidential ambitions,
Yeah, well, that's one thing I've noticed about Brown is I talked to multiple people who compare him to Obama favorably. Mm-hmm. But one thing we've learned from Obama is you can be a rock star and be adored and then have an equally opposite negative reaction against you if you do something voters get. Right. I don't know if you do something voters don't like if they feel like you're not running the government competently and delivering the services and the service they expect, the economy they expect the government to preside over. It's depressingly. I'm getting to a point though where all of these arguments just boil down to the way this country works and how it prevents anything from ever getting done. Because in a normal country, in a parliamentary country, a party loses an election, and then there are members you can't deal with, but you don't care. Right. You've got a few cycles to run things. You eventually screw it up. But by that point, in most countries, the opposition party has learned some lessons and reformed and put some new people in charge, and then you've got more of a give and take here. I mean, here it is a really depressing situation, and I think conservatives call all this liberal whining. But we just got out of a failed presidency. Republicans, I think it's in their interest that this is a failed presidency, and they're already talking about it as if it is one. And it's not like both parties are fundamentally everything they do is doomed to fail. It's that the system they work in demands that they the boldest idea and the proposal that makes the most sense has to get watered down through incredible veto points. I mean, getting in this election, the fact is that Scott Brown might come to Congress and demand he gets to vote down this health care bill, which already passed both houses of Congress. It's just that they need to go. And again, in no other system would you need to run this through so many hoops.
No,
it's
I mean
the level of so people need to dial it back and say, well, is the problem that like Barack Obama, who we thought was smart, is actually really bad at running this government and all his ideas are broken, or is the reason this sucks and Ben Nelson has a kickback and Joe Lieberman's able to throw a fit and take something out is because of the way the Senate works? I don't know how. I see some liberal groups again, like Fire Dog Lake, who I think are the most interesting opposition liberal group right now, focusing on how they can screw over Democrats who voted for the health care bill, and that's in the House. That's pointless. Like all of the energy should be on breaking down the Senate, because I think it's in the Republicans' interest too. They're not going to get like a 60-seat majority anytime soon, just because of the way the country's built. it's in their interest if they have 55 seats to not be utterly unable to deliver conservative governance, because they were utterly unable to do that when Bush was president, and everyone punished them for it.
One way I'd put that, right, is that, as you say, people often say it's liberal whining. Liberals are upset they can't pass what they want to pass. But I think the solution that makes the most sense is for members of the Senate to get together and implement a rule change. It takes effect 6 years or 8 years into the future when nobody knows who controls the Senate. Because I would much prefer, just from the point of that, I think an enormous amount of cynicism in the part of the country is bad for democracy. I would much prefer a world in which when George W. Bush and the Republicans who the country just elected promise something, they can do it. And if the people don't like it, then they can vote in Democrats, and Democrats can undo it. And that's just how you run the system. What we have, as you put it, right, we have a parliamentary politics without a parliamentary system. And that essentially gives us the worst of both worlds, right? We have a Congress in which the majority party, if it also controls the White House, acts as an attachment of the president. The idea of checks and balances is sort of, in that level, is almost woefully hilarious at this point. And so they act as an attachment to the president, which means they don't have internal institutional incentives the way they once did, or the way they were at least supposed to. And so when they are faced with a tough decision, you have these rules that were supposed to fit a system in which the Congress had internal incentives, and everybody would sort of get together and hammer out an agreement. But what you don't have is a rule that befits a parliamentary democracy, which is the president can do the thing he was elected to do. And you can't have it work like this, right? You can have a minority that either has the incentive to see the majority fail but can't make them fail. That's the parliamentary system. Or you can have a system where the minority has no incentives to see the majority fail and can make them fail, so they're brought to the table. That is, in theory, our system. But in reality, our system is the majority has both the incentive and the power to make the majority fail. And when the minority can do that, you can't govern, and both parties can't govern. The problem here is nobody can govern. It's good for political reporters, all right? You get a really exciting election every couple of years. But it's bad for the country and for the system, and on and on. And it does get to, I think, to bring this down from the level of the abstract for a minute. Mm-hmm. Democrats can pass this bill. If they decide not to pass it, that's what happened. They decided not to pass it. House has voted for it. Senate has voted for it. The House could simply pass the Senate version, and the Senate could pass compromises through reconciliation. It's easy as that. And I find it really, really shocking that it's even a question whether or not they will. There is a substantial majority on the side of this bill. The reconciliation side of things is not difficult to do, given that the major compromises here on the excise tax and subsidies are directly related to revenue. And it really is one problem the Democrats have had in this entire argument, I think, and you see it here, is that you wonder if they understand why they're doing this, right? If they get it in their bones, right? 18 to 45,000 people die a year because they're uninsured. There is needless chronic pain and chronic infirmity and impairment. There are hundreds of thousands of medical bankruptcies in this country. On and on down the line. There's an enormous amount of human suffering and anxiety that could be prevented by this bill. We're not entering utopia, but it's better. That is a damn good bill to pass. And it is just on a human level inconceivable to me that they would say, it may make my re-election somewhat more difficult, I'm not going to do it. But because they act like that, and because they treat it as if it's just another political piece, a piece on the chessboard, of course the voters don't get the bill. If the bill was so great, you'd think the Democrats would be a little bit more excited about passing it. But instead, it's just this torturous, endless, depressing process in which everybody's saying, it's not that great of a bill, and it's, because, it's not that great a bill compared to perfection, but it's a hell of a lot better than where we're at now. But B, the people who are behind it just do not seem excited about it. And the idea that there would even be a question about if it came to that, would the House pass a bill that will save hundreds of thousands of lives and be the largest accomplishment any president has had since Johnson? You think, no, of course not. But the fact that you'll have a better sense of this, but I don't know. It does seem crazy to me because they'll have an option after this election if they lose it of either getting to the finish line, failing, and disappointing disappointing their activists, and also informing the conservative movement that they've won and they can run the town over the course of the year, or they've got the chance of passing the bill and getting a lot of flack
for, disobeying the will of some voters in Massachusetts, and they'll get hit on it. But I'm always of the mind that if I'm Barack Obama and I'm getting called a fascist 18,000 times a day on TV, I might just start doing things which are fascist. And in this case, not as much fascist as a parliamentary maneuver that exists right now that has been used to pass things. It's not like the nuclear option. It'll be called the nuclear option. I'm sure.
But this isn't a nuclear
Fox
option
News
we're talking
ask,
about here. It should
Evan
just be
Bayh if it's
said.
a nuclear option. He'll say it is. But I need to start wrapping up because I've got more
stuff
to do. But I would say, and I'll throw it back to you for the end. But I would. One thing I think Republicans will take from this election, Brown has a lot of things going for him. He had a terrible candidate. I don't know what school of campaigning says you should take any time off or that you should deride the idea of campaigning.
Right.
I'm getting told, like, Martha Coakley's rally right now is barely full. I've just been to Brown rallies all day. They're full and excited because they've seen the guy 100 times before, and he keeps getting bigger crowds. But he is, when he talks about health care, he says, let's pass real health care reform, scrap this, and start over. Obviously, you and I know that means he wants to kill health care reform for all time. But, he can be held to that. Most of the rest of his rhetoric is about transparency. And I think that's what you're going to have Republicans run on. People forget that in 94, probably the most popular part of the contract with America, everyone remembers welfare reform. That was popular and that was important. But, Republicans actually had substantive congressional reforms in there about how long you could hold a committee chairmanship. They were pushing for, they took use of the C-SPAN first. A lot of that is because they don't have the same idea of how government should work, and, they think anything that's outside instead of in the back room is more likely to fail. But, those things are popular. And they were popular because Obama ripped them off and used them in 2008. And they'll be popular if Brown wins and they decide just running a guy who drives a truck and talks about transparency is going to win for us. So two things there. One, I think Democrats need to confront what they actually can do after this election that'd be good for them. And two, that will be the Republican message if they're smart from this.
I think
Brown has not talked anything about... I wanted to talk him down. He's talked very little about issues. It's just all about government is not transparent enough and people don't work together enough, and we need to change that. And that's Democrats need to grapple with that and not panic.
I think that's absolutely right. And I would just say on the other side, right? Mm-hmm. Democrats have passed this bill. They own it. It's done. It passed the House with, the vast majority of that caucus voting for it. It passed the Senate with every member of that caucus voting for it. This bill, they own it. The question is whether or not they want a failure running against Brown's message in 2010, or what they can sell and what would be, in substantive terms, an achievement. And I find sort of, my sense from what you're saying is that, Brown is probably going to take this. And, probably as well he should. I mean, Coakley has just done a very, very poor job implying to the people of Massachusetts that she gives a goddamn about them or feels anything less than entitled to their support. Mm-hmm. But, for Democrats more generally, it's, I think your summation of where the Republican message is going is probably right on. And for Democrats more generally, I think that they really have to ask themselves, do they want to walk into that saying, yes, not only is all that true, and we were secretive and what we're doing is unpopular and unemployment is high, but we have nothing to show for it.
Yeah.
Or to say, unlike everyone else, we delivered. That, it was ugly, but we delivered.
It's tough for me to imagine. I mean, Republicans built on Social Security reform, but they didn't get this far. Democrats will have realized they went really far into the quicksand, and is the best exit route to just go like this and duck under it, or to pass something and get yelled at, because they're getting yelled at anyway. I hope you didn't sign up for this thinking I would have good news for you from the field, but they're. I
don't look for good news out of elections. I'm very fatalistic about elections. I just figure they'll go how they go. The one just the I think you're right. Just the one other point I would just make very quickly is that my sense of all this when we're talking about the health care reform bill, any bill, is that they become way more popular when they pass and way more unpopular when they fail. Same as how if you poll voters after an election, more of them say they voted for the winning candidate than actually did. That there's if you pass health care reform, that day, every newspaper in the country is going to run a headline with the word historic in the title. Every single one of them. And I do have the sense that people just sort of lost the intuitive feel of what it is like to win elections based on accomplishments, you know? I think that everybody is very comfortable at this point with the victories of obstructionism and the victories of the minority. But I think it's been a long time since anybody has really run on accomplishments, like concrete, serious, substantive accomplishments. And I do wonder how viscerally the Democratic majority gets that. I mean, they've gotten that they need this bill, but at this point they're exhausted and they're battered and they're scared. But my God, you know, it is so clear that the American people punish failure and tend to sort of reward what they perceive as winners. And to willingly put yourself on the wrong side of that is just such a shockingly dumb move that it defies belief.
I think that's where we're going to see Coakley spin. I think whatever happens, Martha Coakley's name is going to enter some seventh circle of hell that was reserved for Michael Dukakis and who else? Not Benedict Arnold. I'm thinking of
McGovern.
Yeah,
but he was more honorable. You know, at least he was trying something there.
I'm thinking of people who, I guess, we're in Boston. So what is about Massachusetts? I'm just thinking they have Michael Dukakis and Bill Buckner. She's going to enter that level where all these things that you're talking about depended on somebody not fumbling 18 times in a row, and then she did so. So, I mean, I'm going to go back and cover the dead end of this. I'm going to let you. I'm joined what I assume are going to be morose liberals in Washington tomorrow night.
I don't know.
I remember there were parties in the street when Obama won. I don't know
what
the opposite is.
Say it again?
I remember there were parties in the street when Obama won. I don't know what the opposite will be. Do you think we'll see Republicans streaming out onto U Street and celebrating the most important election of all time?
Georgetown is going to be packed tomorrow night. I mean,
collars will pop, as will champagne
Smith
bottles.
Point, right? It's Smith Point. Smith Point, I think he's spilling out onto the streets.
I mean, do you think we'll have a 1.2 million people show up on the mall to see Scott Brown inaugurated or sworn in?
I don't know what it's going to look like. I mean, you know, I think that I think it's a weird time in American democracy.
Oh, well, we could just save a lot of time and said that 45 minutes ago. All right, I'm gonna go run to Scott Brown's final rally. So thanks a lot for talking.
Thank you.
Thanks.